I'm originally from Mississippi, and at 16, all I wanted to do was get out of Mississippi. I could tell you, I probably didn't know anybody who had $100,000. You know, I'm just saying. We saw what we didn't want. And that drove us to become who we are. Most of the banks were saying no because we had no business experience. Nobody in the corporation said they were going to lend us anything, but yet we had this desire to do it. My neighbor called, hey, you got an alligator in your yard. First time I called the sheriff, and he finally came, and I was like, well, who else is coming? He was like, it's just me and you. He was like, okay, I'm gonna get on one end, and you get on the other end, and do you have anything to pry with? I was like, what? So anyway, I found this long, handle, and so my role was to agitate him, so force him to him.
Okay.
And then he was standing over and grabbed him. And then the second time when it happened, my wife saw it first, but naturally she went in the house.
Right.
And so I was like,
she had the right response.
She said, well, it's in the yard somewhere. I'm like, dude, I can't call them without knowing where they are. And so then it started raining and it was thundering. So finally when it started raining, I thought he was gone. And finally I got in my car to go leave. And wouldn't you know, they came back out. Obviously they're very experienced with doing this because he went behind the bushes, behind the AC. He blindly went in there and got the thing out. Wow. Yeah. Then he handed it to a lady.
He handed it to a lady?
I'm serious. And the lady grabbed it like, it was like a doll or something, man. I was like, man, this is crazy.
Explain to me what you do.
Well, for the most part, we operate dialysis facilities. And my role in the facilities are all the operations from a financial perspective. The business of purchasing the supplies, managing the budgets, just managing the money, payroll from the aspect of 401k, anything to do with financial or the operation, the financial arm of the business. That's what my role is in our locations.
And did you study that particular thing in college?
No, not at all. We have no business background, all right? We work for corporations. Nobody in the corporation said they were going to lend us anything, but yet we had this desire to do it. So what we eventually had to do, and it's funny, Brentwood, which is the church that I go to, I've been involved in Brentwood's for about 32 years. I started to go to the Sunday school class, and it had some amazing people. And I was the youngest person in the class. I'm talking about, I was 20 years younger than the average person in the class. I was maybe 22. And so the average person in my Sunday school class was 40 on up. But they were well-accomplished people, And so I just fell in love with the personalities of the class, because they were so accomplished, but nobody spoke about what they did for a living. And it was just fascinating to see. And that's where I met your parents. I'll never forget this. We had a Sunday school lesson that was being taught. Part of the question that the Sunday school teacher asked, does anybody in here have a dream or something that's been imparted in them that they'll be open to share with the group that they believe in God to do? And I'm like, man, why would he ask that question? So, I raised my hand and I shared, I say, hey, here's my name again. Here's what been put in our spirit. My wife and I would like to move forward with opening up a dialysis facility. And, we would like to be able to service the community and et cetera, and things of that nature. And so the teacher was like, wow, man, that's amazing, man. You really hear too much about individuals wanting to do that, And so that was the end of that. So when the class was over, we're walking from the Sunday school class to church. The gentleman walked up behind me and he said, hey, here's my card. That was very interesting what you shared. Could you give me a call tomorrow? Because I might be able to lead you to some financial assistance with finding the finances to move forward, or give you some leads on banks and stuff like that. And so that started our journey on putting together our final business plan. And at that time, we hadn't completed a business plan. In fact, we needed to learn how to do a business plan. So we actually and University of Houston has a business department that actually teaches you how to do a business plan, and it also allows you to walk through presenting your plan to a bank.
Okay.
And these individuals who are teaching you are retired professionals.
Okay.
Bank lenders and, business owners and things like that help you go through the process.
Hi, I'm interrupting this episode for a very important reason. We're building a community here, and we want you to be a part of it. So I need you to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone. It's the only way the algorithm knows we're here. Also, leave a comment. I personally check every comment. Now back to the show.
We had to actually learn what the components the supplies that we would need, the equipment, what our budgetary numbers for the dialysis equipment, what our budgetary numbers was for the supplies. So those things are very unique, because it's specific to dialysis.
Right.
So there was a lot of work that needed to be done that we needed to learn ourselves, the water system, how to maintain the water system, all the components of a water system. We needed to find a facility that could house all of this, the square footage, as well as the stations, the machines. We needed to be able to find the type of machines that fit our budget, because dialysis machine can vary from $30,000 to $50,000 per machine. So there was a huge learning curve that went with not only wanting to do it, but first you got to learn how to do it, and learning how to do it on paper is totally different from learning how to went from paper to making it a reality. So it was a huge learning curve for us.
Did you ever look and go, honey, I think we're biting off way too much?
Yeah, to be honest with you, the only reason why we kept going, it was something within us, and I call it the Holy Spirit, it was God. Because the more we dove into this, the bigger it got, and the more expensive it got. And the numbers that we first thought we needed far exceeded. Because you could go, it's almost like a restaurant when you can go, depending on what type of equipment you can go from a $5 million project to a $2 million project, or break it down to. So we had to first wrap our minds around the totality of the project. Then we had to deal with, okay, what could we realistically qualify for? And so we had to, and at that time, you think about it, coming out of college, a lot of times it's not the best time credit-wise.
Right.
And so one of the things about a business plan is it allows you to do the projection for the first, third, and fifth year, but it also gives you that component of how do you get it started, and with the, your assets. What do you physically have to have to get licensed?
Okay.
So you first have to go, naturally Medicare guidelines, because you want to be Medicare certified. So the state of Texas gives you the roadmap, or in their policies and procedures, it tells you what you have to have to eventually be licensed as a facility. It gives you all the space requirements. So your quote unquote blueprint that you're eventually going to need to map out for the space that is required, it gives you that space, and then you have to put your quote unquote projected equipment in that space, and that kind of allows you to shape the budget that you need.
Okay.
Now, based on your quote unquote ability to get the monies, and you have to, what we had to do in our situation, we kept driving, we kept trying. And at that time, there used to be a bank called Bank One. Well, Bank One was bought by Chase Bank. And so right before that purchase, Bank One had Bill Clinton was the president. They had a movement where they needed to have more minorities in the industry, entrepreneurs. It was forcing banks, I say forcing, but they had this incentive for banks to loan more money to minorities. And one of the biggest opportunities was for female minorities.
All right.
You know, and so through the phone call that we talked about originally from the Sunday school class, he led us to a banker who was the vice president of the bank, of Bank One at that time. And with our business plan, you know, which we had presented multiple times prior to that, with no success. And what we learned was our fallback was most of the banks were saying no because we had no business experience. Okay. Well, how are you going to get some business experience without actually getting the experience? I mean, so, you know, and so, but even that kept, every time we got told no, we didn't leave so discouraged. It's just, we felt like, you know, something was going to come up, you know? And I don't know how to explain it. It's just, every time we said no, it's like the fire grew. All right. You know, but it had no reason to be growing because we had nothing like to look back on that could drive the situation. $1 million, $1 million. You know, and so when you don't have it or you don't have a background to get it, it can seem so far off. But yet, if you are inspired to do something, that doesn't seem that big of a bridge to cross. And so we just kept moving. And so eventually, when Bank One had this initiative, we got a very honest, you know, evaluation from the person. And here's ironically what he said. The vice president of the bank at that time was getting a promotion to another bank. But because of his relationship with the understudy that had been working with him at Bank One, he was recommending this gentleman to take over his role, even though he didn't, quote unquote, have the experience. But because Bank One was so impressed by the vice president who was leaving, they was willing to give this gentleman a shot. So the timing of this worked out in our favor because, to be honest with you, what he basically said was, I am doing this long, not so much that I believe in your business plan, but as a favor for the gentleman who's leaving because he believes so much in me, you know. And I was like, I don't care what, you know, what your driving force is, you know, God works in mysterious ways. And so we were not able to get the $1 million that we needed, but we were able to get the seed, at least enough to get in the game. And that's what we did. So we had to go back to the table and then reduce our plan to the monies that we were allowed to have. And that's what we did.
When you were 16, did you imagine yourself being an industrial engineer? Did you know?
Not necessarily. I'm originally from Mississippi, and at 16, all I wanted to do was get out of Mississippi.
You're not the first one I've heard that from. In Mississippi.
That was my focus.
See, I don't know much about Mississippi. I grew up back north. Just give me an idea. What was it like?
Well, you know, due to the fact that there was not a lot of opportunities where you can go to amusement parks or things like that, we pretty much gravitated to outdoor sports. So you either were good at basketball, baseball, football, track, or something swimming related. But those kind of was the choices that we had. So, and our budgets was very limited, you know. So, you know, we did a lot of outdoor activities.
Did you grow up in a house?
Yeah. For the most part, growing up, I grew up with my grandmother. Okay. So we lived at one point, you know, probably with 12, 13 people at one point in the home.
13 people in the home. You say like that's nothing. Oh, just 12, 13 in the home.
I mean, I'm just saying, at that time, you know, we stayed with my grandparents and they had 12 kids.
How many siblings? Who was there?
I'm the only child.
Okay.
And so when I lived with my grandparents, it was only up until the 4th grade. I was 10 and 11 before my mother and I moved out to our own home where it was just me and her. I first getting out of high school, I thought that I was going to go to the service. At least that's what I was leaning toward. And so one of my closest friends in the neighborhood played football for Alcorn State. And so he was very persuasive that I needed to give college a chance and things of that nature. When he was in college and graduated, he got drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles his senior year. And so, but his senior year was my freshman year.
Okay.
And so he recruited me to give it a shot at Alcorn. And so, which I did, and got a scholarship at Alcorn. So I played there for 2 years. After my second year, I didn't want to play football anymore. So I transferred to the University of Southern Mississippi, which is in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And I didn't play any sports there. I was just focused on my books.
And what were the books? What were you studying?
Industrial technology.
So
I majored in industrial technology as soon as I went to college period. That was my major. For some reason, I was always intrigued with, something where technology based. I knew that in my mind, I just thought that the industry that I was going to be in was going to be tech driven. So I wanted to be on the cutting edge of that. So when I went to school, that was my degree.
what turned you into that? What made you think about that?
Well, I looked at it from this perspective. I wanted to get out of Mississippi, and I knew I wasn't an athlete in the frame of going to a professional level.
Okay.
So in my mind, I just kind of narrowed it down to what could you do somewhere, what kind of job that you can learn that you can do anywhere. And so that was the driving force. So that's why I chose, industrial technology, because I thought that no matter what city I went to, I could find a job. And so that's why I stayed focused on that, because I did not want to go return back to Mississippi. So, and I had limited amount of places that I could go. I had never been to Texas. I had an aunt that lived here. And so, talking to my mom, talking to my aunt, we were able to come to some agreement after I graduated from college, and then she and her husband welcomed me to Texas. And so that's how I ended up in Houston. My girlfriend at that time was Rodney Wilson. So Rodney and I met at 15. And it was crazy because we met at 15, not knowing, that it would end up like it is now. But we met at 15, and we eventually went to the same school. We went to Alcorn as well. Okay. She majored in nursing. And so she actually, Alcorn had a 2-year program. And then after that 2-year program, they had to finish their nursing program at another university that had a 4-year program. So she transferred to the University of Southern Mississippi, also where I was. And so we went to University of Southern Mississippi. Upon after graduating from Mississippi, University of Mississippi, we all came here. I came here first and got established, and then eventually she came maybe a year after I got established.
And you were still dating during that time, so
yeah,
she was a little bit following you, or?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, we started at 15, and through God's grace, we've been together from 15 up until now, and so we've been married now 36 years, but we actually started dating at 15. My wife has always been really focused. She's a very compassionate, driven person. I mean, she's just driven. And so she's always been able to, and she was a straight A student too. So she's always been able to excel on a high level, intellect-wise and things of that nature. She's very accomplished education-wise. So when we got here, she worked for St. Luke's, and then she eventually, after that, maybe 2 years, she went to MD Anderson. And with her drive and compassion for what she did in the cancer industry, she got promoted so many times. Eventually, she was the youngest nursing director for MD Anderson Hospital.
Wow.
Yeah, and they gave her that position even though it required additional educational experience, but they loved her drive to the point where they were going to pay for her educational, but give her the job first.
Whoa.
While she did she also did the educational part. So, but that's kind of her. She's kind of the glue that holds everything together. And despite all that we go through, I remember so many people telling me, especially this, man, you never want to go into business with your wife. And in my mind, I was like, man, what do you mean by that? Because mind you, Bernie and I've been talking since 15. So we kind of passed the stage of boyfriend and girlfriend. It's like more like a friend now where I can talk about anything. So why wouldn't you want to go in business with somebody that you trust, who know you when you didn't have anything? And then if you happen to be successful, then you're comfortable with because when we got ready to go in business, we had no idea how big this project was. And I think I sometimes I laugh to myself because if when I look back on it, if I would have known what we were getting to and how big this thing was, I don't know if I would have did it. You know what I'm saying? But at that time, it was a situation where, and my parents, my grandmother was on dialysis. She began to have experiences on her side of the family where people were on dialysis, and we had got a chance to visit the dialysis facility in Mississippi, and we were not pleased with what we saw there. So it kind of was in the back of our minds. And then when we got here, my wife worked for, as I stated, MD Anderson, and she met another nurse who had a contract for MD Anderson for servicing their dialysis patients. And she would come and service the dialysis patients, and eventually that young lady left that particular role and opened up her own home dialysis business. And my wife and her became good friends. So as the young lady's business began to grow over years, she would always come back and check on my wife and ask her would she consider leaving MD Anderson to come work for her. In my mind, I'm saying MD Anderson is a world-renowned facility, and they have all these great benefits, and I know how much you're making here. How could a person, who's doing their thing in dialysis afford to offer you this type of, because naturally she was offering over what she was making there. And so that went on about 3 years, but the third year, the number got so crazy, I was like, hold on, wait a minute. Look,
the numbers this woman was offering your wife to work for her.
Yeah, I was like, look, hold on. We gotta take this serious, And so my wife did. And so she left MD Anderson and went to work for her. And that was a good experience. It worked out for about a year. And then from that experience, the seeds were planted. But that was a home dialysis business. So we started talking about this division, or we got serious about it in 2000. Okay. And that's when we began to put pen to paper, talking about how could we do this. And so from my experience being at Tyson in the engineering department, it gave me a perspective where I needed to find a space first, and it needed to be within a certain amount of square feet to house the particular amount of stations that we needed to start off with to be profitable, And so, so that's what I started to do. We started to put together a business plan for a 12-station unit, and the only thing about that is that we didn't come from wealth, and so we had no experience, and so at that time the average clinic was almost $800 to $1 million, which could have been a deterrent, but for some reason, the more my wife and I talked about it, the more we got inspired to do it. We had no idea how we could raise the money though. But every time I tried or she tried to say, well, maybe this is just a fantasy or something, it would always flare back up. We'll be watching television, or we'll be talking to somebody, or we'll be doing something and it will come back up that we could do it. It's something about being inspired to do something that makes it not crazy, that you feel like you can accomplish this. We're in Houston, first of all. We're from Mississippi. We have no business background, all right? We work for corporations. Nobody in the corporation said they were gonna lend us anything, but yet we had this desire to do it. And we lived in Sugar Land. Sugarland was not a good, quote unquote, space for dialysis. And you may say, why is that?
Why is that?
Because of most clinics at that time, the parameters that they use is most of your dialysis patients are mostly in a low income area. You know, they're not highly educated.
Right.
And so.
And Sugarland's a money area.
Sugarland's a money area.
Yeah.
Most people are healthy. Most people are educated. So how are you going to be able to pull or get patients that live in this zip code area and they don't hit these quote unquote, you know, parameters? But we felt that it will be a great opportunity. But, you know, I think the overall concept was every time we got ready to give up, something would happen that would lead us to say we're on the right path. And it was something with it, because this was, I'm telling you, this was too big for us, you know, and not being physicians, because most physicians are the ones that start their own clinic. So we're not physicians. My wife is a registered nurse. I'm in the engineering background. So we're not the most common people to own a dialysis business. But yet, we had that drive. And we had picked a geographical area where there was no dialysis clinics. Mm-hmm. We just felt like if we got in the game, everything else would take care of itself. And so eventually that's what we did. We bought the water system with the capacity to handle a 12-station unit, even though we only used 4. We got licensed for the 4 with the ability to expand to the 12. So that's kind of what the story, that was the driving force. And so naturally we had a lot of ups and downs going through it because we didn't know a lot of this stuff. There was no consulting firm. There was nobody that we could quote unquote go call, hey, how you do A, B, and C at that time? Because this was a in-service facility. And at that time, most of the in-service facilities were owned by DaVita or Fresenius, which is a major corporation, which, you know, they have trade secrets. They're not going to allow you to just walk into their quote unquote business and just model after them. So, and there was no consulting firm or anybody that we could call. We looked nationwide to try to find if there was such a thing. There's somebody that could help us pull this off. And there was not, which ended up being a blessing. Right. Because it forced us to learn all the aspects of the business. Not because we wanted to, we just didn't have the money to buy, you know, we didn't have the money to hire or to do it. So we had to learn all the aspects of the business. We had to do multiple things to get in the game.
Wow.
You know, we started growing so fast that I had to find a new space while operating the space that we had. But because we were growing so fast, all the money that was being made had to be put right back into the business for operation purposes.
Okay.
And so eventually we grew to a point where I had to take on another building right behind the existing building that we had and had to build that out to a 24-station unit. So we're talking now, we started with 4, then we expanded to 12, we outgrew that 12, and then behind it, we had to do a whole nother 24. And so we're working this whole time because the patients that lived in the Sugarland area were actually driving into these other areas where dialysis clinics were. But now that we had a clinic in Sugarland, they was like, hey, we ain't driving over there, we're gonna go right here, which pissed off a lot of the doctors because we didn't have a lot of doctors on board with our ownership.
Right.
So they were mad because they had relationships with other clinics, but in order to keep their patients, they were forced to support our business.
Nice.
You know, and so it was tough in the beginning because they didn't believe in us. We didn't come from wealth. I could tell you, I probably didn't know anybody who had $100,000. You know, I'm just saying, I mean, to be honest, but a lot of times people are looking to see what type of person, your character. You know, people will help you if you show and approach it the right way. And sometimes God allows us to, he already has a plan and a path for you. But you got to put your foot in the water. And it's easy to listen to a sermon, but to be the sermon, you know? And those are some of the experiences I had to learn. And if you were to ask me, what would I tell a person who wants to start a business, or what would I want to tell a person who wants to take on a project that's bigger than them and they feel like it's been driven by God, is to do it. You know, and you're going to learn more about yourself. You're going to grow through the process. Here's the other thing you got to learn. You got to learn how to manage money. You know, everybody talks about wanting to be successful. Well, what happens when it happens? What happens when you get the $1 million? Where do you go?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Car dealership.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, so all I'm saying is, a lot of times we have to learn how to say, I don't know. And to go to the right people who may have already experienced what you've experienced and say, hey, can you help me? You know, and one of the things that, one of the greatest things that my accountant, I remember Lionel Sims, he was so helpful with steering me to the right people, you know, and he would say, you at a point now you need a financial advisor. And then, you know, he introduced a great guy to us, and at the time when he was advising us, at that time I just thought it was like, man, that's crazy, man. The expectation he has for us to save, and the expectation in the pockets of what he was talking about. And, you know, and I was like, man, this don't make sense. And I remember my kids at that time, my son was probably 8 and my daughter is 11. And he was talking about, you know, college and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, man, come on, man. We ain't gonna never have no money. You know what I'm saying? But following his guidelines, and I know we didn't do it to 100%, but my son went to Morehouse and not on a scholarship, and we paid cash for that. But the only reason we were able to pay cash for that was following this gentleman's advice. You know, both of my kids were able to go to school, and we were able to pay cash for their college education. You know, we're from single parents. You know, we were able to buy our parents, when our parents got older in Mississippi, and their neighborhoods declined, we were able to buy homes for them, new homes in new neighborhoods. You know, that was huge for us. You know, taking care of our mothers and taking care of them to the point where they didn't have any more expenses other than the ones they created. We purchased their cars, we purchased their homes. That was huge for us because we came from a position in our lives, Mergen and I in Mississippi, that we saw what we didn't want. And that drove us to become who we are, you know? And so we knew that we could do better. Now, we didn't know how much sacrifice it took, but I'm glad for the experience on the other side. Yeah. Because the other blessing that I learned from the experience was, because we did not have the money to hire a consulting firm or hire different skill sets because we didn't have the money at that time, we were forced to learn all aspects of the business. Now, it was very tough during that period. But from that experience, it allowed us to pull ourselves back and say, hold on now. There's a lot of services that we actually are contracting out that we can do ourselves. So I ended up buying an office building to house my billing company that does the billing for the dialysis clinics. And I leased the other spaces out to tenants. That created another business opportunity. The financial part of being diversified led us to make some other purchases in the real estate industry where we could purchase those homes and lease them out. It also gave us opportunities to get investments in stocks, set up 401k companies for the companies that we currently own, but also have a financial advisor advise us on financial advisements, as well as doing some things ourselves stock-wise. I just think that when you are driven to do something, learn all of it, because you can end up having 3 or 4 branches of businesses that come from that one centralized. As I stated, from dialysis, we started a transportation company that we did because the transportation company was a business. Then you got a real estate, LLC, that came from a business. Our kids went to school, graduated. Now they work for the business. So there was so many opportunities that was created, all from the faith of that Sunday school class, of raising your hand to say, hey, here's what's in me. If you ask me how we're gonna do it, I have no idea that we're gonna do it. But we had the confidence to know that if God is for you, now you're gonna have some problems, but you're gonna have some problems whether you work for somebody 100%. And that's one thing that would always tell us, look, yeah, we got a lot of problems, but at the end of the day, we've been able to travel the country. We've been able to see the world. We've been able to live a lifestyle that we would never ever dreamt of without doing this. I just think that if you are inspired to start your business, follow your dream, get your business plan together, do your presentations, trust the process, get into it, learn as much as you can, hire the best people, make sure that the people, whatever, if you're in a service industry, make sure that you put service first. Make sure that your people that you're serving, the customers that you're trying to attract, you need to make sure that they understand that you're doing something different. What makes me come here? What is the driver? What's your niche? Why would you want me to come here for dialysis? Here's why. Here's what we do here. Here's what we have to offer. We know your name. We know your kid's name. We are going to be there for you when nobody else is. And so large corporations have gotten away from that. But when you're on your own, that's your own signature, and people will remember you long before. We have patients who have, family members who still come back, write us cards, or they see us out somewhere and they're like, hey, well, you took care of my husband, you took care of my this, that, and the other. Thank you, this, that, and the other. And so it's been an amazing journey. We've been able to do a lot of things in the community. We have scholarships that we donate. So it's been a blessing to be a blessing. And I just think that that's what God wants us to do. He don't want us just to be blessed, but he wants you to have the fruit. It's easy to say you blessed. My mother says this. She said, a popsicle is better when you share it, And so that's kind of the thing that we go by, share, show that you care, and it all works out.
That popsicle thing is great, because I remember the old school popsicles, you snap them in half.
Yeah.
So it's almost made to share.
Yeah.
Don't fight it, share it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I just believe that God blesses you to be a blessing. And point period. And you don't get to choose who you bless. You have an assignment. Just fulfill your assignment. For me, one of the most important things is to have a relationship with God, because you're getting ready to travel some roads that you have never crossed. And so for me personally, and still today, that's the most important thing that I do, is build that relationship, because I don't know what my assignment is, and I don't want to miss my assignment. The last thing I like to say, man, be good to yourself. Whatever that looks like for you. If that's, quiet time with yourself, or whatever your favorite thing is, or your favorite person, just be good to yourself. Man, this life is so short. I know, and you probably, all of us know, that we can probably attest to people that have gone so soon. And that dash that we have, that's all we got. And once it's over, it's over. And so what do you want to be remembered for? My pastor always said, man, if your funeral was on a Friday, would anybody take out work for you? Would anybody really remember what you did? And so, Those are the little small caveats that you want to think about. Would somebody really drive or fly, come to your funeral? You know, go out their way? You know, and so those are some of the things in my mind that help center me. Hey, you know, put God first. Take care of the physical, but man, be good to yourself.
Excellent. That's perfect. Great to wrap up on. Rodney Wilson, we thank you so much for coming out, for talking to us, sharing your insights on how to live right, how to start a business if you want to start a business, stay strong. I want to thank Blue Ribbon Digital Media in Houston for having us out, for setting up the studio. Much blessings to them, and thank everyone for watching.
God bless.